As you guys know, promises are a dime a dozen, right? Making a promise, that doesn't impress anybody really. It's keeping promises that turns heads. Actions, they speak louder than words, but unfortunately a lot of people will make a promise at a drop of a hat, right? They will just jump straight into it. They won't bite their tongue, and they bite off more than they can chew, really. And so what ends up happening, right? You either just give up on the promise entirely because you're in over your head, or you burn the midnight oil and you try to get it done. And so if you're lucky, by the skin of your teeth, you fulfill the promise, you feel all of this relief, and if not, well, then somebody has beef with you, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is don't be over the top with your promises, be more literal. You may not have realized it, but I just said a lot of things that I didn't actually mean. Did you notice what I was doing there? So let's break it down. Let's look back at what I just said and see how many idioms, how many sayings, like, raining cats and dogs, that kind of thing, non-literal statements. Let's see how many I just said. As you guys know, promises are a dime a dozen, right? Making a promise, that doesn't impress anybody really. It's keeping promises that turns heads. Actions, they speak louder than words, but unfortunately a lot of people will make a promise at a drop of a hat, right? They will just jump straight into it. They won't bite their tongue, and they bite off more than they can chew, really. And so what ends up happening, right? You either just give up on the promise entirely because you're in over your head, or you burn the midnight oil and you try to get it done. And so if you're lucky, by the skin of your teeth, you fulfill the promise, you feel all of this relief, and if not, well, then somebody has beef with you, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is don't be over the top with your promises, be more literal. Now that example is maybe a little bit excessive on how many times I was using a saying or an idiom, but the truth is we really very frequently say things we don't mean and not even notice it. And I guess that would be okay in certain circumstances, but the truth is this starts to bleed into everything. This starts to bleed into the way we make our promises, even promising things that we don't mean and not even noticing it. This thought of not really saying what you mean is one of the reasons why English is just a hard language to learn. So let's take a few real life examples of how promises and our phrasings, our word choice is sometimes not as exact as possible. I'm going to use some, like I said, real world examples with a few promise cards that actually some of our supporters have written. Now, I'm going to talk about the word choice of these promises, and please don't think in any way that I'm trying to belittle these commitments. Really, I genuinely believe that our supporters have some of the greatest intent behind their commitments, and so while the word choice may not be perfect here, I'm not trying to criticize it or maybe say criticize these people. I just want to use these examples as really a learning opportunity on how word choice can get better. So let's take some examples here. So these are real. This one says, help Francine in any way she needs me to. This one says, I will do what I can for who I can, when I can. I will tell my daughter every day that she's a genius, right? Now when we look at the word choice with some of these cards, I look at this first one, help Francine in any way she needs me to. I can even imagine myself before, because I said I would start it, making a promise like this to my father, who would ultimately pass away of small cell lung cancer. And that's why I don't want to criticize these people, because I can imagine myself doing that. But when we look at the word choice, any way she needs me to, that's basically all-encompassing, right? Does that mean you're willing to quit your job for Francine? That may actually be true, right? As I may have been willing to do many things for my father that were on the extreme side in his final days. But is that what we really mean? And could that word anyway be more specific in some kind of phrasing? You know, I will do what I can for who I can when I can. I mean, that's basically saying you'll do a promise for anybody at any time. And while I think our thoughts of kindness and our commitment to it does need to be greater, our word choice could probably get better. And so as the examples continue, I wanted to point out another one that is, you know, a little bit shorter, but this one says, I will donate blood within the week. You know, some of that specificity, while the sentence is not all that much, it's not some whole detailed plan or contract, you know, it gets close to really meaning what we say. And I think that's what word choice is all about, because when we're so grandiose, when we use always, never, anytime, everything, when we look at our word choice and we're leaning that way, a lot of promises can be broken the second they're made, because they're too wide or all-encompassing. They maybe don't account for external circumstances or things that are beyond your own control. And so word choice is such an important part, a critical part of being a person of your honor. You know, with over 5 million promise cards distributed to over 153 countries, the examples that I'm showing are not some kind of one-offs or selected specifically just to make a point for this video. I'm sincere when I say that this is extremely common. The type of word choice in these examples that I've pointed out is not atypical whatsoever. In fact, some of this type of word choice is maybe more common than less. And so that's why I think it's important to talk about it. There's so many words to choose from. There's so many words we say. And actually a book called The Female Brain by, and I have to read this, it's Luann Brizendine. I'm just bad with words and names, which I guess is part of the point of this video. The point being that this book, written in 2006, I believe, just tries to differentiate males and females in a bunch of different ways. And they say that in this book that women speak 20,000 words a day and men only speak 7,000. And I know that kind of sounds like some excerpt you'd read in a magazine or something on BuzzFeed or something like that. But actually, I don't know if it's my own personal gender bias. I mean, we all have kind of bias. I was like, oh, okay, maybe that makes sense. I don't know, right? But the truth is that they did some research behind this and they could not ever find this study. Apparently that study never took place. And there was actually a fact checker from the University of Pennsylvania, this professor named Mark, who was a trustee in phonetics. They looked into this and it was never found. So there was a study done on this though with digital voice recorders that actually did happen. It was published in a journal called Science in 2007, and they looked at the differentiation between men and women and how many words they said, and it was statistically irrelevant. And this study showed that there is no statistical difference between the number of words men are speaking versus women. And we look at this study, on average, 15,669 words per day. That's men, how much they're speaking. And then for women, it's 16,215. And if you know some things about, you know, statistical analysis and variance and error rates and things like this, that is statistically irrelevant for this. And so it's about the same. Now, our word choice and how literal it is, I imagine that it goes up and down, right? Depending on the scenario, who you're talking with, it probably changes. And so if we really want to understand word choice, I think we got to dive into a literal example. You might use word choice that's more specific with your promises. I hope that's true, but maybe when you're giving instructions to, I don't know, say a person on how to build a hibachi grill, right? Like maybe you would want to know that, are we using figurative language then? Well, it just so happens that we found a study about two people trying to build a hibachi grill, and let's talk about how figurative the language is in this very sort of direct and action-oriented kind of instructional conversation that people would have. Okay, so the following study was actually in the Journal of Psycholinguistics in 2005, and it really was the task of two people involved in assembling a hibachi grill. And it's just, I think it was just kind of this little guy, but really there were two roles. There's, one person giving the instructions, and then one person listening to those instructions, and they've got to assemble this grill. Now, the person who's actually given the instructions, they came to a session prior to this study to actually, go through it, so they actually knew what they were talking about, and it wasn't the first time they were reading the instructions, so they have a little more context than the person who's actually building it. They used the manufacturer's instructions, and they only needed one tool, which was a screwdriver. Now, to test this accuracy of language, this word choice, and then linguistics, they really tested this in four different ways to communicate. And that is, number one, full co-presence. This means that both of the subjects, the person giving the instructions, the person building the hibachi grill, were both in the same room in full view of one another. The second was face-to-face co-presence, which means that both subjects were in the same room, but separated by an opaque screen, so they really only had eye contact that was possible, which kind of sounds like a weird scenario, but I don't know. That's how it was done. Number three is voice only. The subjects were in different rooms, and they were separated, but they could use like an intercom, just voice system. Number four was email communication. They were housed in separate rooms, communicated these instructions only through interactive email, which sounds like a miserable task, but again, that's how they did it. Now, there was all kinds of results in this study, but I wanna just kind of pull out one piece and talk about it, which is how often in intercom face-to-face and in the written groups, how often figurative language was used. So not really actually literally saying what you mean. How often were phrases like that, so not just specific words, but phrases used in this very, transactional instructional task? Well, that was 3 phrases per 100 words. Now, let's break that down just a little bit. If we took the Harry Potter book, right? The average sentence length in a Harry Potter book is 12 words. So if we looked at 100 words, that means about 9 sentences if we round it up. So basically what we're saying is that a figurative phrase was used 1 in out of every 3 sentences. I mean, this is an extremely literal task. Why would you say anything but what is literal? I mean, no one in this exercise is gonna say the grass is greener on the other side, or we gotta separate the sheep from the goats. I mean, this is not a point where you would need anything like that. So the point is that our language is just naturally not literal. And in many cases, that's okay, but in our promises, not so much. So let's talk about a few tips that you could use to get better with your word choice, to really flip that switch and get a little bit more literal at these points of commitment. Number one, act like you are literally dictating a legal contract, right? When you're about to make a promise, kind of think through that lens, that it's gonna be litigious almost. And that will help you get to a better level of accuracy with your promises. Another way to think about it is, imagine that promise you were just about to say, you were gonna literally make to 1,000 kids in an assembly that were in the 5th grade or something, right? Bring up the stakes in your mind, and you will up your game when it comes to your word choice. Number 2, don't be afraid to go back. And what do I mean by that? You might be in a conversation, and you say a promise, and then 2 sentences go by, and your mind is going like, wait, I didn't really mean all the time there. You should just go back and say, what I meant to say, what I should have said is every Tuesday, and just wanted to clarify that. I apologize. Don't be afraid mid-conversation to go back, or even mid-sentence, and rephrase. Obviously, we want to make our promises as good and accurate first swing. That's the most honorable way to live, but we're all flawed in different ways, and we make mistakes. So it's better to recognize it then and there, and just go through just a mild embarrassment to take that back step. That's better to do then than when the promise is broken and try to say, well, that's not what I really meant. So try to rephrase that as soon as possible. And a lot of the times I'll say, I should say, and then what I really meant to say. So an example would be saying like, oh yeah, I work out every day. I should say I work out every day that I am at home, or I work out every weekday or weekend day. You get what I'm saying. It's just backpedal mid-conversation. You can limit the scope of your promises by using if-then language, right? So saying something that is really big You might want to say, yeah, that's totally gonna happen, but maybe there's external circumstances. And then you say, well, I will show up if my flight arrives on time. Don't worry, I'm gonna be there, right? You can throw in caveats with promises. And this hones things just a little bit more and gives it that type of precision that we're looking for. And the last thing to do is to write it down. Well, why? I mean, there's a bunch of reasons, but specifically for word choice reasons, it brings you to a moment of seriousness, right? You, I think, will be a little bit less likely to write really grandiose things after hearing some of the things we said here and taking that time and patience to contemplate a little bit more. And contemplation is one of our 7 elements of honor. I reserve time to understand the world and attempt to understand my place in it. When I see that my commitment is needed, I remember that promises are not easy to keep. I believe in planning and careful consideration. My words and actions have consequences. I should be patient with both. Word choice is hard. To be honest, I'm still struggling with it today. You know, things just accidentally slip out and don't completely mean what I say, and then, you know, you almost feel guilty, right? But the truth is that we're all on a journey. And to get elite with your promises, to be a person of your honor is, quite frankly, just not easy. But that doesn't mean it's not worth it. That doesn't mean that I can't get better. That doesn't mean you can't get better. And it also doesn't mean that there's ever a final destination to all of this. Sometimes really going for something you believe in doesn't mean that there is an end to it. It's about having a genuine intent to be a person who believes in something enough that they're willing to take those steps. They're willing to learn. They're willing to get uncomfortable in order to make themselves, their families, a community, a cause, to make something better. I hope that you continue to go on this journey with us, with me, to get better at promises that we all know we need to keep.